Bonjour à toutes et à tous. Nous nous retrouvons ce matin pour un nouvel épisode de notre série Mapping the Next Steps, donc un rendez-vous en ligne et interactif que nous vous proposons au Relais Culture Europe. Et cette série d'émissions est conçue comme des moments pour échanger ensemble sur les enjeux artistiques et culturels de l'Europe aujourd'hui. Et donc évidemment, c'est dans un moment très particulier que nous nous retrouvons ce matin, puisque le jeudi 24 février à 5h55, le gouvernement de Russie a lancé une offensive militaire contre l'ensemble du territoire ukrainien, et donc élargissant un conflit ouvert depuis maintenant 8 ans. Cette offensive se poursuit aujourd'hui et elle a causé déjà des centaines de morts, des milliers de blessés, et près de 3 millions d'Ukrainiens ont dû en fait fuir leur pays. Et donc il nous est paru très important, donc dans ce cadre et de cette émission de Mapping the Next Steps, de se mettre à l'écoute de ce conflit, de son vécu, de ses récits, de ses enjeux culturels et européens. Et donc il nous a semblé en premier lieu important d'ouvrir un espace pour écouter différents vécus de cette guerre et par des artistes et depuis le territoire ukrainien. Et donc nous allons entendre en premier temps Artem Chapeye. Artem Chapeye est un écrivain, journaliste et traducteur ukrainien. En France, ses récits sont traduits et publiés par les éditions Bleu-Jaune, représentées par Tatiana Sirotchouk, que nous remercions pour nous avoir mis en relation. Et Artem a été reporter pendant la guerre du Donbass, et donc il est actuellement engagé en défense territoriale en Ukraine. Et Artem a pu partager avec nous un témoignage qui a été réalisé hier, jeudi 17 mars, et un témoignage qui a été recueilli par notre collègue Florence Diez. Nous l'écoutons.
Bonjour, je suis Artem Chapeye, une écrivaine ukrainienne. Je suis en armée ukrainienne maintenant. Premièrement, je voudrais dire une petite chose en française. Je voudrais remercier vous pour toute la solidarité. Je crois qu'il faut croiser l'enfant de l'autocratie poutiniste parce que je crois que seulement une Russie démocratique est la sécurité pour tout. Je suis désolé que mon français n'est pas très bien. Je vais parler maintenant en anglais. So, you were asking me about, first of all this displacement, and I would like to tell my story, which is very typical, which is a story of millions now in Ukraine. I recently read there are already more than 3 million people who left the country since Putin's aggression started. And this means mostly women and children who left. This means like 1 million families who are now separated. You know, once 10 years ago, I wrote a book about displacement, about migration to abroad, but that was about economic migration. This novel was translated into French as Loin d'ici, près de nulle part. This is a very loose translation of the title, and it was about economic migration mainly. Now, this displacement is caused by more tragic circumstances, by literally war and bombing. On the first day when the war started, my wife and I, woke up to the sound of bombs in Kyiv, in the capital of Ukraine, and we packed and left in 15 minutes because we had our grab packs ready. We were warned this could happen, but we didn't really believe it. And it took us 3 days to reach my hometown in Western Ukraine. The trip, which usually takes only 10 hours. Now it took 3 days. And I was worried as a writer that words failed, words betrayed me, and there were not enough words to describe what is happening, all this atrocity. I didn't know what to say, what to think. And after 3 days, I realized that sometimes words are just not enough. Sometimes you need words, but you also need to act. So I went to the army. I was accepted. Not everybody is accepted. There's like too many volunteers. And I'm now separate from my kids for about 3 weeks, as long as the war has been going on. And I think I will be separated from them for another month, so maybe a year. Well, that's at best. And this is just a very typical story of millions of people. Millions of people have lost their homes, and this is very tragic. I think, well, even though on the first day the words fail, you still need the narrative. You need the discourse to describe all this. This has to be remembered, and this will be remembered, I think, for generations. I was born 35 years after World War II, and much of the Nazi occupation of the then Soviet Union actually happened here in Ukraine. You probably know about the occupation of Kyiv, about the Babin Yar, the genocide of the Jews of Ukraine. This happened here, and now this reminds us a lot of what happened then. And as a kid, even though I was born 35 years after the war ended, I remember always painting the Nazi airplanes and bombs which are being bombed, which are being burned down. And I think my kids, they're now 7 and 9, will not only remember this their whole life, having to run away, having to hear the bombs. I think also Ukrainian, the kids of my kids will also be remembering this. This is something that is hardwired in us for generations. And I also wanted to say that we were talking about the narratives. I wanted to remind people about the need to listen to local voices, the need to listen not only to intellectuals, but to local, common people. What we are seeing here now in Ukraine is that everybody became so united. We Ukrainians, we like to quarrel among ourselves, but that's an internal issue. But now everybody seems to be united by the same tragedy, by the same fight, by the same need to resist. And I was writing already before, and I want to reiterate it now, that it seems that we are somehow placed now to be at the pivotal point, maybe in human history. It depends on whether we surrender or not, whether we lose or not, what will happen next. Because for the first time in 80 years, there's now this imperialism coming back in very crude terms. And if we lose, then next aggressors may appear. Some other country might decide, okay, I will attack my weaker neighbor, the smaller neighbor. And it's very important not to let us lose. At the same time, I realize that it so happens that sometimes you just don't have a choice. And many people in Ukraine are really offended that NATO doesn't defend us enough, even though they give us arms, that NATO doesn't close the sky. It is my personal opinion that, sometimes you don't have a choice. You just have to stand up to the aggressor. And, well, that's tragic and sad to say, but, they cannot kill, Russia cannot kill everybody here, I hope. So there's a need to preserve the planet. So we don't like it, we don't want it, but we have no choice. And you have this feeling that most people realize that sometimes, for example, I never thought I would be in the army. I was once, as a teen, I'm now 40 years old. I was in the army as a teenager. I hated military service. I never thought I would be in the military service, but sometimes you don't have an option. And it's not only about the soldiers. Like you can see here, people united around this resistance, this total resistance. Everybody is doing it in their own way. Women in the occupied territories like Kherson, unarmed women stand up to the aggressors, like yelling to their faces and slowing them down, actually. And or there are some people who are not fighting, but for example, these simple auto repair mechanics who are like repairing the vehicles for the army for free using their own money, or other people like women who are using their energy, their money to prepare food for those who need. Somehow money stopped being an issue. Somehow you feel that you need much less than you thought you would need, and all your needs are being met somehow. And this is something unprecedented. Like we here in Ukraine, we have some experience in self-organizing. I think Ukrainians are good at self-organizing, but I've never seen it on such a large scale. And at the same time, I've never seen so much international solidarity as we see now in Ukraine. This is also something unprecedented, and it's very important. It supports a lot. So I wanted to thank you once again and let's stand with Ukraine.
C'est nous, Artem, que nous remercions d'avoir pu partager voilà, vos pensées, vos réflexions par rapport à ce moment exceptionnel. Et donc, nous allons maintenant ensuite voir une vidéo intitulée How to Live During an Air Alarm, qui a été réalisée par Liera Polianskova, membre du Theater Art Group, et réalisée le 5 mars 2022. Et cette vidéo a été présentée dans le cadre de l'Assemblée exceptionnelle Solidarité avec l'Ukraine, et qui a été organisée par le Centre Pompidou et la BPI le 9 mars dernier, et en partenariat avec les collectifs Beyond the Post-Soviet, Initiative for Practices, Visions of Radical Care et la Maison de l'Ours. Nous l'écoutons. Merci beaucoup, Liera, pour cette vidéo qui nous plonge aussi dans le silence d'une écriture. Et pour ouvrir un petit peu notre échange et ce débat ce matin, là, peut-être un premier mot de se dire que écouter, c'est peut-être aussi se demander ce qu'on écoute. Et pour échanger avec nos invités, donc ce matin, on va maintenant basculer en fait en anglais pour faciliter nos échanges. Et donc, first, it's past the question about to listen is perhaps also to ask ourselves what we are listening to. And at this moment, where stories are being constructed through the media, the written word and images, and these narratives act, construct representations, accentuate dissensions, existence, or oblivion. And these narratives raise also the question of who speaks, who produces the narratives, and from where. And we are all stakeholders in these choices and these narratives. And so with us this morning, and to open these sections, we are in presence of Kateryna Botanova, a cultural critic and curator from Kyiv in Ukraine, and she's co-curator of the multidisciplinary cultural festival Culturescapes in Basel, in the Switzerland. Good morning, Kateryna. And we also, thank you. We also meet our partners, friends and colleagues, and Besa Luci, editor of the online media Kosovo 2.0. Good morning, Besa.
Good morning.
As well as Valentina Bonizzi, artist and researcher. Good morning,
Good
Valentina.
morning.
And also with us online our director and colleague Pascal Brunet. Bonjour Pascal. And with us in Paris, my colleague Laurence Barone from the Relais Culture Europe.
Morning.
And you, we are listening to us also. You have also the opportunity to intervene and ask your question. Chat is also open for that, and on which you will also find resources about our online session this morning. And so, in order to start, thank you once more, Kateryna, to be with us this morning regarding these exceptional conditions. And so, what would you like to share with us, and what are your point of attentions regarding the issue of stories building, Kateryna?
Thank you for invitation to be a part of this talk today. I do think it's a very important topic and very important questions that you are asking, and I I must admit that it was very emotional for me to hear Artem's voice. I know him personally. I know his books, and I do know that he brought his family safe to the west of the country and went to the army. And me sitting here, safe with you over the screen and hearing his voice recorded from, last night somewhere where he is and where he cannot even say where he is. It's very touching, I must admit. And I'm very grateful to him that he highlighted a few very important points about the narrative building is the fact how important it is to listen to the voices of real people with real experiences, whether they're public or not. When we're talking about, when we're talking about life in general, right? I think many emancipatory movements that happened in the last tens or years or decades were supposed to teach us that it's really the key thing is to listen, to be able and to be open to empathetic listening to the people who have an experience instead of trying to impose a certain interpretation, a certain intellectual framework, a certain vision upon them. But we are here again in the situation of the Russian war upon Ukraine, when it appears to me that more and more as we proceed deeper into the war, it's been 3 weeks plus now at the moment, that the voices of the people from within, or the people connected to the situation in Ukraine, are being less and less heard. And the situation when the Ukrainian position and the Ukrainian perception of what is happening is being sort of sidelined to the position of a victim. And that's the only place, in a way, allowed, especially in Western media, for Ukrainian voices. So in this sense, I really am grateful to Artem that he found time and energy to speak, to us, to all of us from where he is now, and to highlight how far from being victimized the situation with Ukrainian people are today, that although we don't have a choice, as he said, we really don't have a choice. We're not fighting the war because we're, crazy military people. We're not fighting the war because we wanted it. We're not fighting the war because we hate someone else. We don't have a choice because the people and the houses and the lives are being destroyed as we speak, as we speak now, in this moment. And it's something which I myself find very hard to even process, that literally every minute, whatever I'm doing, whatever I'm talking about, whether I'm volunteering to help Ukraine or I'm just doing my job, people are dying in my country just because this war is being unleashed on them and nobody can stop it. Another important thing that he said, and it was also a bit implicitly in Liera's wonderful silent video, is how the perception of life and needs changed for people in Ukraine, and how, well, he said the money stopped being an issue, and Liera was going over the basics. It's very bare basics that people take with them, to the shelters or to the exile, or we call it temporary displacement, with a huge hope that the key word is temporary, because most people that are being displaced nowadays, which, as you said, around 3 million, they don't want to be displaced, they want to go home. But those basics, those very bare minimum, is also being, in a way, supplied to each other because people are standing so much together. And this unity and solidarity, solidarity is such an important word in a cultural discourse in Europe, right? We like to talk about solidarity. We like to talk about standing next to each other and for each other in different situations. What is happening in Ukraine now, and it really does amaze me to a great extent, is unbelievable solidarity and standing together and helping each other. And I really, really hope that when we continue this discussion today, but in general, we talk about who speaks for whom and who owns the narrative and who has the right to talk, that those voices find their way into our discussion today and wider.
Thank you very much, Kateryna, to all your feedbacks, and to underline these very important points regarding this very important point, to listen the diversity of the voices, and it's perhaps a first condition in order, to exchange, and how to take in consideration diversity of involvement and responsibilities for this moment. And to continue our exchange, I would like to ask if Besa, we know that in the past decades also the European continent had a very strong and also territories of conflict and war, particularly of course in the Kosovo, and that already today, the Kosovo live also regarding the consequences of this conflict. And of course, war stories are not comparable in terms of times, but we'll be very glad, Besa. Thank you once more to be with us this morning. What will be your reactions, and what would you like to share or react regarding the first exchanges of this talk.
Thank you very much for also having me. I'm very much humbled to be part of this discussion, especially after we listened to Artem and saw the other art piece, and of course it brings back also certain memories, being from Kosovo and being from this region, memories of war and of a conflict. And I actually would like to just connect to what both Artem and Kateryna then extended about the importance of listening to local voices. And I think, unfortunately, that is something that doesn't happen not just during the time of war, but also in the times leading up to war, and also what comes after as well. There's this tendency, and I think especially by those that tend to dominate the narrative and shape the narrative. So whether it is political elites, whether it is bigger international media structures, there is that tendency to strip citizens of agency somehow, and to really just use certain, let's say, images or voices to fit a pre-constructed framework of how they want the wars and conflicts to be talked about. And it is usually the local peoples, the experiences, the struggles, the various forms of injustices that also lead to conflicts and to wars that kind of get erased or marginalized and ignored. And I mean, while I've been following and reading on the war right now in Ukraine, you've heard this a lot, because there's this tendency, I think, to really in the international media narratives to really just talk about it through a geopolitical lens, and to place it as between the war between West and East, and also to kind of put responsibility only on governments without ever truly engaging in the discussion or trying to listen to what are the voices that are coming from the country itself, from the people themselves. And this is something that always repeats, unfortunately. And it's something that I do think that individual, like this discussion as well, I think that hopes to challenge and not to allow it to remain as such. And for me, I think while I was listening to also the discussion till now, I was really thinking how actually this really continues to also dominate even in what comes as what is called as a post-war period. You know, this tendency to ignore local voices will continue to be there. So I think what is important also now for us, for some of us who are able to, is also to make sure that how we're not ignoring that, but also to be prepared of what comes afterwards, and how do we make sure that the way that what is happening right now in Ukraine is going to be documented in a variety of avenues and through a variety of perspectives and experiences, because this is something that I've seen very much happen in this region, in former Yugoslavia, in Kosovo, that tendency to kind of set a framework of how you're supposed to talk about the war once the war is over, that it's always is just as equally, I think, problematic. So these were just some of the things that really came to mind. I was reflecting on while I heard Kateryna talk, and also Artem, but also in general, I think the critique that we've been hearing about this tendency, just to sometimes, even though there's been this very good wave of solidarity in the mainstream public discourse, there's this tendency to strip people of individual agency, and I think that's something that's problematic in itself as well.
Yes, thank you very much, Besa. And also, yes, it's a very important point also how in our different places where we are, to be very responsible regarding also the question of the diversity of the voices. There is not only one single voices, but there is also this diversity, and we have to take care also about this diversity, and also to be responsible each moment regarding also the documentation of all these stories now and also for the future. And now I would like us to ask to Valentina, as you are working particularly regarding the framework of the academy of the authors, regarding a more very sensitive approach, and also particularly about the question, but not to be take care about forgotten memories and in connection with local communities. What will be also your reaction and regarding, for example, your artistic work, today and for the future?
Yeah, thank you very much, Vincent, and thank you for having me in this conversation. It has been very powerful, the first intervention by Artem and the video and all of you like talking. And as Artem was saying, like sometimes like words fail, no, and you think what can I say after this? And what I felt like during interventions is what I've probably encountered during the work that I did in the experiences I had in Scotland, in Palestine, now in Albania and in Kosovo, has been that of learning from the archive of like the memories and the narratives that you look for and you find, and like considering the space of the archive as a space for like learning really and unlearning in a way, you know, so of real like pedagogy in a way, if you want. And when we were speaking about practices of listening, it made me realize how much the practice of listening and storytelling processes that we bring on as artists or as people who experiment anyway others forms of narratives is also to pay attention to silence, which is something that I think in the like is parallel in the search for specific narratives, for precise narratives that now, like more than ever, is necessary. Is also to identify where silence comes from, because I think that's what also is something that defines very much where I mean, and I'm speaking from the point of view of someone who was born and grew up in Europe and right now is in Kosovo, and so the also relating with Besa was saying before, is a way of covering narratives, silence, and well too often I think we don't analyze that well enough from also an individual point of view. So is yes, deconstruct the narratives that we don't understand, but also deconstruct our own from our point of view. And this, of course, it's for example, if I just think about you know, like in this precise moment, the position of, for example, of and the position of Europe in not like really problematize the position of Serbia in connection to what it's happening, and the position of Russia it's unbelievable. I mean, it's incredible. What does this come from, and how do we deconstruct it? This is also my question. I don't know what you think about it, but it would be good to problematize that too.
Yes, thank you very much, Valentina. And we go progressively to new questions and new issue. And yes, but yes, it's very important also how to develop and be very aware about the question of developing new practices in terms of listening and in terms of deconstruction and construction about the facts and the reality and the diversity of the narratives. And it's also our responsibility to be very aware and responsible, yes, in this sense. And now I would like to ask my colleague Pascal, perhaps to share your feedbacks regarding all the first elements we have shared this morning.
Oh, I don't have so much analysis. As I think it's really more interesting to listen to our colleagues with experience, and it's a way to indicate what we want to do in Relais at this moment. It's really in this media space completely saturated by a kind of narrative of experts with quite a lot of geopolitical explanation, but from the West perspective only. But also this saturation with a kind of only victimization of heroization of people, but we not are able to listen deeply. And I think it's what we want to do. It really create space where we could listen, simply listen, what it's the analysis, the feeling, the memories of the people involved in this different situation. The second thing we would like to do, it's connected, it's how we could also deconstruct our own representation. It's something I think through the three first intervention of Kateryna, Besa, and Valentina. This sometimes we listen with a very, very wrong representation of what is going on the ground, but also what is going on the ground before and after. So we have always in projection, we project a lot of representation. I think it's really important to have this ability to a kind of decontamination of regarding our own representation. So if something really create a situation of listening and understanding at the end, I hope. And the third thing I think we would like to create is not, it's how this moment is also, it's not a Eurocentric approach. Huh? It's really a moment where we have also to think about Europe and what is happening in Europe as maybe a transformation of the European project. I don't know, but we have really to look and not to produce a kind of romantic narrative about Europe. The moment is complex and the political action are complex. So also the European answer need a complex analysis. And it's not to be against or to be for or to be so too much critics. It's really also to provide to our colleagues, to the citizen, a kind of more complex analysis of what we are doing as European under this transformation of the European Union. So it's what we are doing, we would like to do, and we are not able to do without Kateryna, Besa, Valentina. It's really something we need to build together and really to create this place together. This is certainly what we would like to do. So we could go after.
Yes, thank you very much, Pascal. Yes, it's very important, yes, for the Relais, yes, and with all our partner stakeholders to create the condition of this safe space to work and about the complexity of the situation and to its better understanding. And Laurence, what would you like to share with us regarding all these elements?
Just to follow Pascal and what we heard, maybe the question of Besa of why it is repeating. And I was asking myself, because I don't have the experience, I can only ask this question for my own position and point of view. And the question is, yes, why it is repeating, this question of victimization, valuation of some life and not the others, a difficulty to listen deeply what is at stake, difficulty to listen deeply people. And I think it's one of the questions for me at that moment, how it's possible really to think about this and to really find the context to deeply deconstruct the our way to see, our way to not listen, our way also to maybe not take care of things that disappear, are erased, are not said, and we have our responsibility, not just effectively to constate the situation, but to really think about culturally and see how can we find a way to really address the question. And that's my point. And Artem was saying we surrender or not, and I think it's a question that we can also ask ourselves.
Yeah, thank you, Laurence. Perhaps we can propose the espace to Kateryna, perhaps to complete and how the different talks and points from all the colleagues, partners this morning, perhaps give a new echoes about your own situation now, and what Kateryna would like to share with us. Or perhaps Pascal, do you want to ask or propose something?
It's more a question to start a conversation with our three guests today. It's really this moment. Kateryna, you work about this decolonization process of thinking about the post-Soviet moment, how it's difficult for society to go through experience and through previous narrative. Besa, you are working also about this, how it's possible to go through very heavy narrative, and how we could imagine way to do this. And Valentina, you are also working about methodology of this. And I think it's really necessary, and which kind of place you imagine and which kind of methodology or process you imagine to invent this counter-narrative, I could say.
So perhaps, yes, Kateryna?
I have a feeling that my image is a bit frozen on your screen, although I do hear and see you. Is it possible?
No, that's okay.
All is fine. Yeah.
Okay. Maybe that's my computer playing jokes on me. I was, when we talk about decolonization, and thank you, Pascal, for mentioning it, because I think it has been, but especially now it's becoming more and more important and more discussed concept, not only in Ukraine or in Eastern Europe as it was before, but also outside of Western Europe, because we are used to applied decolonization methodology and thinking towards former colonies of Western Europe. We talk about South America, we talk about Africa, but sort of Eastern Europe was not ever really the place to deploy these tools. But the thing is, and what we also see in a way, the history replaying itself, is that, Ukraine as a part of Eastern Europe has always been, throughout the 20th century, especially throughout the second part of the 20th century, stuck in between big powers with an agency to create narratives. And the fight within Eastern Europe was pretty much towards finding a possibility, decolonization of the thinking, which means finding a possibility, becoming an agency in itself, finding a language and an imagery to talk and assess its own past and its own present. And, in Ukrainian case, this is something which was happening very actively in the last 8 years after Euromaidan, after annexation of Crimea and the beginning of war in Donbass. There was a huge kick into, looking into the past, but also into the present. Valentina said beautifully and very important about the spaces of silence, and paying attention to the silence and silenced part in the history. I mean, Ukrainian history is full with a heavily silenced part, because being a part of the empire of Soviet Union, being a part of a Russian empire on one side and Austro-Hungarian empire on another side, I mean, it's the history of silences. But if we're talking about, nowadays, coming back again today into the moment of the war happening, is that all this talks about changing perception, all this talks about, becoming an agency on our own, about taking care and listening to diversity, they to a certain extent come to a halt at the moment when something as unbelievable as the war breaks. And that's also one of the paradoxes of the Ukrainian history, Ukrainian contemporary history, that the moment when sort of the discussion, inside the country, inner debate on, the multiplicity of identities inside the country, of the notion of, political entity and, the notion of political nationhood, the history and the present and the future, the moment that discussion really starts, an external power comes and smashes it over. Because again, the moment you come to the war, you come to the discussion of the basics. And all this intellectual debate is possible, between us. And also I can talk to you because, I am in a safe space in Basel because that's where I live for a few years. But a lot of my work and a lot of my friends and a lot of things that matter most to me are there where the talk is possible, basically only about basics.
Thank you very much, yes, Kateryna, and we go deeply about the new development about this more the political awareness about all the people involved in regarding at this moment, and perhaps Besa, which perhaps echoes regarding your own experiences, analysis, and practices, perhaps regarding your position in Kosovo, perhaps.
Yes, and to connect to Pascal's question, if I understood correctly, it's kind of how we can go beyond the linear kind of narrative that might exist out there and look into other venues and other ways and how we tell stories and what stories we tell. And I mean, for me, I think, we think of two particular issues. I mean, one is the issue of language, and the other one, the issue of representation. And I think these two are very important. So in my work and in the way I approach our journalism as Kosovo 2.0 and our decision-making and storytelling, it's really through these two, because when we're talking about, and I think the issue of representation here links to Valentina's concept earlier about silence, because there's this tendency when we think of representation, we think of what we see, how we see it, and what is communicating to us. But a lot of times, for me, the issue of representation is what we're not seeing and what we're not hearing. So what is beyond what we are receiving in terms of whether images or information, words, or whatnot. So, and I think so. And I mean, this is something that applies to the day-to-day, and I think it definitely is something that should apply as an approach when there is moments of conflicts and war. So everything that we hear and see, how do we? What is it that I'm missing? What is it that I'm not hearing? That I'm not being told? And how can I go about to learn more about that? And then the issue of language was something that. And especially, and I was thinking about this the other day, and especially when the number of refugees for example, from Ukraine reached past 3 million, and it made me also think back of 2015, and when there was also a flux of Syrian refugees in Europe. And I went to check because I couldn't remember the number, and it was 1.3 million back in 2015. And I thought about the language in 2015, the language that was used, it was called the migrant crisis. today it's not called a refugee crisis, it's called a humanitarian crisis. And I think the wording and how we call also different events, it's plays such a huge role in how we relate as individuals to the information, how we understand it, but also what kind of emotions it evokes. And I think that's why language is so important, because in 2015, we did not see the kind of solidarity that we are seeing today. And that's very misfortunate that we didn't see the same type of solidarity. And I do think that by these coined terms like a crisis also play an effect into that, because a crisis is something that communicated to the rest of Western Europe, like, oh, this is something bad that was happening. And so I think that in all of this, I think we really have to be extremely attentive to what words, what phrases, what expressions we are using to name things and to call certain events and to call processes, because it's going to determine not just our relationship to that event, but it's also going to determine also government reactions and bigger structures and how they respond to certain situations. So challenges, so questioning continuously language and also rejecting certain languages is so important when we're talking about how narratives are constructed and who gets to tell them and how.
Yes, thank you very much, Besa. It's also a very important point, yes, about also this ethical dimension regarding the wording and our responsibility. And Valentina, what would you like to share with us also regarding the question proposed by Pascal?
Yes, I think what I can add also to what everyone is saying is like the concept, like we are talking about stories, but we're talking about time, no? So the consequences of storytellings, the consequences of wording. We think, okay, now this is happening now, and how will it be considered in 10 years, in 20 years, for example, how we will relate to it. And in these terms, I think in relation to Pascal's question and my research and practice and what I do is and also that it relates to what we were talking about, what Kateryna was talking about before, about the practice of solidarity, which is very important, because in what we do in the process of telling stories, listening to stories, problematize stories, problematize our own stories, how do we legitimize, what does legitimize this representation? What does legitimize the discourse that we are having even right now? You know, I believe that it can be legitimized by the relationship that we have and how we want to make it last. This, I think, is the challenge, I believe.
Yeah, thank you very much, Valentina. Also, it's also in connection with the question of the past, with the archives, the work about the archives, and also how to work and how the diversity of all these voices and content also will continue to be shared after, and to be aware about our responsibility to keep always this diversity of the voices, and in terms of work and continuation about the diversity and the situation of the stories also for the future. Perhaps Pascal would like to complete, give a new aspect and dimension regarding the actions that we have just had.
No, I think it's, I don't want to complete. I think it's really important to find the place and to find international place. One international platform, I don't know which kind of word we could use, to really explore and to go deeper in this kind of issues and really important issues. If we would like to talk about a democratic space, place where the people could have autodetermination and not be under the project of other area or other organization. So I think art, it's really an important has an important role to play in this moment. Artist has an important role in this moment. But I think we need to invent some place also where we could connect the critical, a kind of social criticism, a kind of political criticism, and this art exploration, art to do critics. So I think I'm quite interesting to listen also how you could imagine which kind of maybe place or we kind of event or sorry for the words, but which kind of thing we could do now to be a little bit in this direction, a little bit in a way to create a place where we could look at the present but look after and create maybe yes a situation where we could start to work together to a clearest analysis or clearest perception of the moment.
Thank you, Pascal. And perhaps Laurence, perhaps.
Just one point, maybe to say that one of the points for me is how this kind of question are put at the center of the debate about cultural policies, about politics, about practices, because for the moment, sometimes we are not considering it as a subject of importance. And maybe if we want to, for once, really take the words and really reflect about what is cultural policy and politics for European democratic space, maybe we need to address this question and think about maybe that collect, archive, listen, decontamine, transmit, making heard, etc., are at the center of such policies.
Yeah, thank you, Laurence. And perhaps our guests would like to perhaps to complete and react also regarding the question of the cultural policies, perhaps. Perhaps Kateryna or Besa? No?
No, cultural policy actually it used to be something that I've been working quite closely in the Ukrainian case. But again, sorry to repeat myself, the situation is that at a certain moment, all the efforts and everything which was done in the direction of building a transparent and democratic and inclusive cultural policy in Ukraine. And there's been a huge change, an enormous change in the last 5 years. Then everything, at least, stops, goes on hold. But if we try to imagine a bit, the future, and it's a bit something which I think everybody's thinking about, but nobody's really ready at the moment to really go deeper into what happens after the war is over. What is the degree of, I even don't know which word to use. I mean, being sensitive and attentive to language, as Besa said, is very important. But what is the degree of a catastrophe that we'll be facing then? And if we talk about, now cultural space and, cultural policies as one of the tools of, really reaching an inclusive society, with the diversity of experiences, with listening to each other, then again, in Ukrainian case, it's a total humanitarian disaster because there is nothing left of what was attempted to be built and developed in the last 5 years on the very different levels. So it's an interesting question, about the cultural policies within an EU and how this tool can be used to not just to solidarize at the moment, but actually to help rebuild an inclusive and a democratic society, in Ukraine when it's possible after the war is over. And it's a great question, which I don't have an answer to yet, but maybe if we all start thinking about it and discussing about it, because it will be needed. It will be very necessary, hopefully very soon.
Yeah. And perhaps, Besa, if you would like to complete.
Back to this issue of maybe cultural policies that come afterwards, and I kind of takes me back to the beginning, and I think that's going to be the moment going to this, like the need to listen to local voices is going to be particularly important, because at least based on what I've seen and what has happened, for example, in Kosovo in the post-war, that is the period when there is this tendency, and there will be this attempt to have everything very much top-down, and especially from structures like the EU. There will be this insistence and this tendency of, okay, now as a society to move forward, this is where you need to focus in these areas, and these are the issues. So a very kind of this top-down approach that will attempt to even more, I think, sometimes put to the margins just what people have went through. And this I've seen it happen in Kosovo, and it was very much the process of healing, the process of what do we do with this experience, or how does it contribute to a larger collective memory, was very much suppressed. And because it was suppressed, it was never dealt with. And it will come, and also 20 years later, of course, we're still dealing in Kosovo with issues of war. And I mean, with the topics of war, and they never really go away. But I think what's going to be important is not to allow experiences to be suppressed, because this is what I've seen happen even beyond Kosovo in the wider region, and it becomes a tricky moment where different actors with different, let's say, different actors with different interests will also try to capitalize on how memory is constructed, and who has kind of like a first hand in how the history is going to be to be written. So I think thinking of linking it to cultural policies, that's the moment when it becomes even more equally important to let people participate, let people say what they want to do and how they want to go about it.
Thank you once more, Besa, for all your feedbacks and point of intention. So now, perhaps I propose we open again also our talks and discussions and regarding also the questions of EU policies and cultural policies, and we go through now to the third step of our online meeting as this morning, and our colleague and guest Boran will join us also to give also feedback also from more the EU institutional side. So we will switch now in French, but our colleague Florence on the chat will exchange with the guests to keep the connection with an English translation, and then we stay all together, and we will have a new round of talks after the presentation of Boran after a few minutes. Bonjour Boran. Donc, on est heureux de vous retrouver, notre partenaire Toute l'Europe, pour cette émission spéciale, et donc qui nous permet aussi avec vous, de faire un petit peu état de la manière aussi dont l'Union européenne a pu aussi prendre ses responsabilités, aussi réagir par rapport à ce moment. Est-ce que vous pouvez un petit peu nous présenter un petit peu quelles ont été les réactions immédiates de l'Union européenne au déclenchement en fait de ce conflit?
Oui. Alors les réactions ont été extrêmement rapides dans le cadre de ce conflit. C'est le jour même, en fait, le 24 février au soir, il y a eu un Conseil européen extraordinaire, une réunion des chefs d'État et de gouvernement de l'Union européenne, des 27 États membres, et ils ont pris dès le début, le soir même de l'invasion, des sanctions sans précédent dans l'histoire de l'Union européenne vis-à-vis de la Russie. Ces sanctions visent notamment Vladimir Poutine et Sergueï Lavrov, son ministre des Affaires étrangères, qui ont vu leurs avoirs financiers gelés dans l'Union européenne. Et ces sanctions-là ont été complétées quelques jours plus tard, 4 jours à peine plus tard, le 28 février, par des sanctions qui sont allées beaucoup plus loin encore, avec notamment l'exclusion de banques russes du système SWIFT, qui est un système de messagerie bancaire, qui est le système de messagerie bancaire le plus utilisé au monde, le plus rapide, le plus sécurisé, et ce qui pénalise énormément les banques russes. Et la Banque centrale russe a vu ses avoirs en coordination avec le Canada, les États-Unis, le Royaume-Uni, a vu ses avoirs gelés en dehors de Russie. Donc, ce qui empêche la Banque centrale russe de contourner les sanctions en puisant dans ses réserves à l'étranger. L'espace aérien européen a été fermé aux avions russes. Et puis il y a également, parce qu'on parlait de narratifs, et ça c'est très important dans la construction des narratifs de guerre, les médias russes affiliés au Kremlin, Russia Today et Sputnik, ont été interdits de diffusion dans l'Union européenne, ce qui est une décision sans précédent et qui vise à empêcher la propagation de fausses informations sur cette guerre qui est d'ailleurs dont la réalité était niée dans ces médias-là. Et puis, au-delà des sanctions, il y a aussi l'accueil des réfugiés, qui est une situation d'urgence aussi sans précédent pour l'Union européenne. Il y a, comme vous le disiez, vous l'avez rappelé, il y a déjà plus de 3 millions de réfugiés dans l'Union européenne. L'Union européenne s'attend à recevoir peut-être 7 millions. Et elle a activé pour la première fois un mécanisme de protection temporaire des réfugiés qui a été créé il y a 20 ans et qui a été activé pour la première fois. Donc, c'est après l'invasion de l'Ukraine par la Russie et qui permet aux réfugiés ukrainiens de bénéficier du statut de réfugié sans faire de demande d'asile. Et ça leur offre une protection qui peut durer jusqu'à 3 ans et qui leur permet d'accéder au marché du travail dans les États membres, d'accéder à l'éducation, à la santé. Donc l'Union européenne s'est mobilisée très rapidement par rapport à cette situation sans attendre.
Et peut-être plus par exemple, en fait, concernant ce mécanisme de protection temporaire, en fait,
Oui.
Qui a pris la décision de l'activer, en fait, au niveau communautaire?
Alors, c'est une décision qui a été proposée par la Commission européenne et qui a été prise par les ministres de l'Intérieur de l'Union européenne le 3 mars.
D'accord, OK.
Voilà.
Et au-delà de ces mécanismes d'urgence, en fait, qui ont
Mmh.
été adoptés en réaction à ce conflit, est-ce qu'il y a peut-être au-delà, en fait, d'autres décisions politiques qui ont été prises, mais plus dans peut-être un moment un petit peu de bascule ou de réouverture ou sur plus des perspectives de développement de moyen terme, en fait, au-delà de ces réactions d'urgence, en
Mmh.
fait?
Il y a la question de l'adhésion de l'Ukraine à l'Union européenne. Et c'est vrai que là, dans le cadre, il y avait déjà des relations qui étaient nouées entre l'Ukraine et l'Union européenne. Il y a un accord d'association qui a resserré les liens politiques et économiques avec l'Union européenne qui a été signé en 2014. Qui avait levé une grande partie des droits de douane, qui facilitait les séjours des Ukrainiens dans l'Union européenne. Et là, 4 jours seulement après l'invasion russe de l'Ukraine, le président ukrainien Volodymyr Zelensky a déposé une demande d'adhésion, la candidature de l'Ukraine à l'adhésion à l'Union européenne, parce qu'il estime qu'il est temps d'accélérer le rapprochement entre l'Ukraine et l'Union européenne, parce que l'Union européenne, du point de vue des Ukrainiens, a une valeur protectrice. Et il a demandé une adhésion sans délai. Alors, et puis s'est exprimé le 1er mars devant les eurodéputés. Et il a redemandé encore une adhésion la plus rapide possible. Et il avait demandé lors du dépôt de candidature une adhésion rapide via une procédure accélérée, spéciale. Et les eurodéputés l'ont ovationné. Il a reçu des marques de solidarité de tous les dirigeants européens, des responsables politiques européens. Et les eurodéputés ont demandé à ce que les institutions européennes donnent au plus vite le statut de candidat à l'Ukraine. Alors après, ça sera peut-être pas aussi, ça devrait être plus compliqué que cela. On ne pourra pas. La procédure d'adhésion à l'Union européenne est quelque chose qui demande beaucoup de temps. Mais il y a déjà eu quand même une accélération du processus qui est à relever, puisque pour adhérer à l'Union européenne, il faut que d'abord l'ensemble des États membres, à l'unanimité, décident d'attribuer officiellement le statut de candidat à l'État qui le demande. Et avant cela, en fait, il faut que le Conseil de l'Union européenne, donc qui représente les États membres, l'institution qui représente les États membres, demande à la Commission européenne de préparer un avis sur la candidature du pays en question, et un avis sur la base duquel les États membres après décident d'attribuer ou non le statut de candidat à un État membre. Et en règle générale, avant que le Conseil saisisse la Commission pour rédiger cet avis, après le dépôt de candidature d'un État, il faut attendre souvent au moins 1 an, et là ça a été fait immédiatement. On a demandé les États membres ont immédiatement demandé à la Commission de rédiger un avis. Mais après, effectivement, la perspective d'adhésion, c'est quelque chose qui prend toujours beaucoup de temps. Ça demande de complexes négociations. On a besoin d'assurer que l'État qui a vocation à rejoindre l'Union européenne ait une économie de marché viable, des institutions stables, ce qui est déjà quelque chose de compliqué à atteindre. Et malheureusement, dans le cadre d'une guerre, ça l'est encore plus.
Mais après, en même temps, est-ce qu'il y a, il y a quand même des points un petit peu d'accélération là elles sont un petit peu activées, et en même temps, est-ce que ça permet aussi peut-être d'accélérer plus globalement peut-être la procédure de négociation, d'adhésion avec d'autres pays qui en ont fait la demande?
La Géorgie et la Moldavie ont également, qui craignent d'être les prochaines cibles de Vladimir Poutine après l'Ukraine, parce que Vladimir Poutine cherche vraisemblablement à étendre l'influence de la Russie dans les frontières de ce qu'était auparavant l'URSS. Et donc la Géorgie et la Moldavie, elles craignent beaucoup pour leur sécurité, et elles ont déposé elles aussi le 3 mars une demande d'adhésion, donc quelques jours seulement après l'Ukraine. Et là aussi, en fait, le Conseil a demandé à la Commission de rédiger un avis pour analyser la candidature de ces trois pays-là, Ukraine, Géorgie et Moldavie, seulement quelques jours après le dépôt de candidature. Donc là, il y a eu une accélération. Mais encore une fois, on ne peut pas adhérer à l'Union européenne du jour au lendemain. Ça ne s'est jamais vu historiquement, c'est toujours très compliqué. C'est des négociations qui sont très techniques. Et par exemple, la Hongrie, qui a rejoint l'Union européenne en 2004, avait déposé sa candidature en 1994. Donc, vous voyez ce sont des négociations longues et complexes.
Après, peut-être qu'on espère qu'aussi l'ensemble on va dire, du temps institutionnel vraiment prendra en compte cette dimension d'urgence et de pouvoir réagir autant que possible rapidement par rapport à ces demandes qui sont faites. Donc là, sur peut-être d'autres pays du voisinage ou de la politique européenne de voisinage, en fait. Donc, oui.
Tout à fait, oui.
Oui.
Mais ça a été le cas. Ursula von der Leyen a dit très rapidement après l'invasion que la place de l'Ukraine était dans l'Union européenne, et que les Européens voulaient que l'Ukraine ce rapprochement avec l'Ukraine, et il y a eu des marques de solidarité très importantes, des témoignages de solidarité à l'égard de l'Ukraine qui ont été exprimés par les Européens, et donc il y a vraiment cette prise en compte-là dans les processus de la situation d'urgence est tout à fait exceptionnelle que connaît l'Ukraine et d'autres pays de la région.
OK, et également en termes un petit peu de bascule, d'accélération, aussi de prise de conscience, il y a peut-être aussi d'autres domaines politiques qui ont connu, là depuis ces 2 semaines, en fait, une formidable accélération, peut-être en termes de politique de défense notamment?
Tout à fait, oui, j'allais y venir. Effectivement, l'Union européenne, là encore, seulement quelques jours après le début de l'invasion, a pris la décision historique, elle ne l'avait jamais fait dans son histoire, d'envoyer des armes à l'Ukraine. C'est 450 millions d'euros d'armes et 50 millions d'euros d'équipements de protection et de carburant. Et c'est quelque chose qui est sans précédent. Et les 10 et 11 mars, lors du sommet européen de Versailles, le chef de la diplomatie européenne, Josep Borrell, a proposé même de doubler cette contribution européenne pour la porter à 1 milliard d'euros. Et aussi, certains États membres de l'Union européenne ont décidé individuellement, pas au niveau européen, mais ont pris l'initiative individuelle d'envoyer des armes à l'Ukraine. Et il y a certains pays, donc parmi ces pays figure la France, mais aussi d'autres pays comme la Finlande ou la Suède, qui sont pourtant historiquement neutres. Donc ça montre vraiment le point de bascule historique que représente cette guerre pour les Européens. Et puis, il y a beaucoup de pays d'États membres qui ont décidé d'augmenter leurs dépenses de manière très conséquente. Il y a le Danemark qui était à 1,2% de son PIB consacré à la défense, qui a décidé de le porter à 2%. Une décision similaire qui a été prise en Suède, en Allemagne. La Pologne, qui était à un peu plus de 2%, va porter ses dépenses militaires à 3%. Et puis, au niveau européen aussi, et ça a été dit lors du sommet européen de Versailles les 10 et 11 mars, et il a été décidé d'augmenter significativement les investissements dans la défense et renforcer cette défense commune qui est à laquelle de nombreux Européens appellent de leur vœu depuis des années, et qui pourrait enfin s'accélérer en raison de cette situation tout à fait exceptionnelle.
Ok, merci Boran. Et Pascal aurait une question pour vous, notamment concernant le processus de négociation des adhésions des pays à l'UE. Pascal.
Non, c'est pas tout à fait une question, c'est plutôt suite à la première partie où on évoque les questions culturelles et des démocraties. Je pense que les questions d'adhésion sont ne pas oublier que c'est donner. Il y a un plan politique qui repose sur la question de l'autodétermination quand même des peuples et des pays. Donc il faut qu'on arrive à créer ces conditions où Ukraine, Kosovo et on va dire États des Balkans soient en mesure aussi de s'autodéterminer. Alors c'est vrai que l'urgence pose des questions d'alliance, pose des questions d'élargissement telles qu'elles se posent, mais je pense qu'il y a vraiment fondamentalement cette question de l'autodétermination qu'il ne nous faut pas mettre de côté. Et puis, c'est aussi les peuples européens qui doivent se prononcer. Donc, il y a un débat. La démocratie demande du temps. La démocratie ne peut pas être quelque chose qui se joue en quelques décisions, qu'elles soient. Alors, je pense la perception que c'est extraordinairement compliqué techniquement. Je pense que hélas, nous le savons, j'allais dire, mais je ne pense pas oublier ce fond politique, et qui me renvoie à la question peut-être plus re-questionner Kateryna et Besa et Valentina, mais je crois que Valentina a un problème d'ordinateur, si j'ai bien compris, qui est, quand on parle de politique culturelle, on parle bien aussi d'aller travailler au fond ce que les sociétés, les peuples veulent, et pour peut-être exprimer la volonté, la nécessité d'un débat clair, d'un débat où il y a des options, il y a des opinions qui sont documentées, il y a des opinions contradictoires, et que ça aussi, il faut que nous sachions l'écouter. Voilà, c'est peut-être plutôt pour renvoyer quoi, je trouve très très important tout ce que Boran nous a dit. C'est ce glissement-là qui me semble qu'il ne faut pas oublier.
Merci Pascal. Et peut-être pour aussi continuer à approfondir, et toujours en articulation avec aussi ces membres de réaction aussi au niveau institutionnel et communautaire, est-ce que Laurence, que tu pourrais nous dire un petit peu plus par rapport aussi peut-être que la manière dont aussi au niveau institutionnel, au niveau communautaire notamment, les institutions ont pu aussi réagir notamment sur les enjeux culturels?
Pour reprendre là-dessus, et je pense pour faire le lien aussi avec ce que vient de dire Pascal, il y a peut-être 2 plans, 2 points. Le premier, c'est que, conséquemment à ce que disait Boran, on a vu qu'il y a eu une réaction aussi au niveau culturel, à savoir que lors de la réunion informelle en fait des ministres de la culture à Angers en mars, on a eu une déclaration officielle vraiment de soutien à l'Ukraine, de soutien aux artistes, aux acteurs culturels, aux médias, appelant aussi à la coopération dès aujourd'hui. Et on a vu par exemple que ça s'est traduit dans les programmes européens, puisqu'un appel à projets comme par exemple Europe Créative Coopération, la date de dépôt a été décalée en fait d'1 mois et demi, mais avec aussi un discours de la commissaire sur le fait qu'il était important aussi de trouver à ce moment-là les moyens en fait de soutenir une coopération en fait avec les acteurs. Alors c'est dans un cadre très difficile, puisqu'on ne va pas reprendre tout ce qu'est la situation aujourd'hui de ce conflit, des personnes en déplacement, des personnes en guerre, mais en tout cas un signe. Ça pose plusieurs questions, ça pose des questions de... Il y a à la fois cette question de l'urgence, comment on fait aujourd'hui. On voit aussi que ça pose des questions de coopération sur le temps, c'est-à-dire pendant que le conflit dure. Et ça pose aussi des questions, comme on l'a entendu, de peut-être à un moment donné se dire et après. Et si je reprends ce que disait aussi Besa, en portant une forte attention, une forte écoute à chacun des moments et en se disant c'est quoi coopérer en fait dans ce moment, en écoute et vraiment de le faire là. Et après, je crois que pour rebondir sur ce que disait Pascal, ça pose aussi, et c'est ce qu'on voyait ce matin, un débat de fond sur ce que c'est une politique culturelle européenne. Et là, on l'avait évoqué aussi dans une de nos précédentes émissions, elle ne peut pas se décréter. Et je crois que aujourd'hui, c'est un enjeu aussi quand on voit là où on en est au niveau européen, au niveau de ce projet, c'est comment on reprend une négociation, mais une négociation qui part par le citoyen, qui part par les différents endroits, qui part par les différentes situations et qui crée des espaces où on peut dialoguer, négocier, écouter déjà en premier, et qu'il y a tout ce terrain-là, puisque c'est... à la fois se dire c'est quoi l'objet d'une politique culturelle, et on le voit là tout à l'heure, ça le déplace cet objet. Est-ce qu'on considère que c'est question d'écoute? Est-ce qu'on considère que c'est question décoloniale? Est-ce qu'on considère que vraiment cette constante détermination, c'est ça l'objet d'une politique culturelle? À ce moment-là, ça change beaucoup de choses dans ce qu'on imagine aussi et dans la manière. Et ça, il faut arriver à le négocier avec un ensemble aussi voilà, de situations et d'acteurs et dans ce moment grave. Donc peut-être voilà ces différents plans.
Merci beaucoup Laurence, oui, pour également ces éléments, notamment en termes là de comment travailler, continuer à ouvrir, à négocier, à activer, puis à travailler sur l'amélioration justement de dispositifs d'intervention publique au niveau européen, au niveau des programmes existants. Perhaps if we come back also to continue perhaps our exchange with our guests. We have tried to translate simultaneously our talks in French thanks to the chat. Perhaps, I don't know if perhaps Kateryna, you would like to react regarding also more the current agenda, the political level, the EU, or what would you like to underline regarding the last exchange we have just had?
I just wanted to mention that we talk a lot about, listening and talking and understanding each other. And you just effectively at least switched me out of the talk for 20 minutes. Just to let you know that I did not get most of the things that were just said now, because French is my very, very, very passive language. So maybe if we're talking about the importance of a language and understanding, these issues have to be taken into account. And if you do invite people who are not French speaking, as me, for example, there really is a need for proper translation to keep us a part of the talk. So maybe that would be important. That's my comment, and I'm sorry I cannot say more because the rest of the talk was a bit of a general bubble for me.
Okay, thank you, Kateryna. And yes, of course, we will continue to improve also the conditions of very equal debates and to work about the right translation, but all the talks in a larger and open way. And perhaps, Besa, if you have perhaps...
Yeah, I mean, maybe just very quickly, I think what's important to remember and to keep in mind that the EU accession and integration process and who becomes a member of the EU and whatnot, it's a process that measures how democratic countries are, but it's also a very political process. And I feel like this sometimes needs to be remembered a bit more, especially in Western Europe, in countries that are already members of the EU, because there's a lot of political decisions in how much a country advances or not. A lot of political decisions are made. So it's not just about fulfilling criteria necessarily. The political dimensions need to be, I think, challenged more. It's just something I wanted to add in that part.
Thank you very much, Besa. Perhaps Valentina, perhaps a last word on reactions regarding these last exchanges that we have just had.
It's a little bit difficult for me to respond to that. I mean, for sure, what I agree with Besa with what she just said. This is the feeling that I have when reacting to the analysis of the EU integration is this to always take into consideration the political aspect of it, and that it sounds like also technical, but it's not. And everything that we spoke about before is part of this is not. So that's it. That's all I have to say in response to that.
Okay, thank you, Valentina.
I think it's really important it's really important to really underline this point. Accession is a political process with technical consequences. It's not a technical process with political consequences. And I think it's really connected with about what we said from the beginning. It's how we could create a debate where this issue could be debated in the different societies. And a debate is also a critical debate. It's not only a kind of new narratives of something. It's really to create this debate. And I think at this regarding this point, I think the policies for culture and the role of the cultural institution, artistic institution, is really also to take our part in this debate and to, I don't know if we will enlighten, but I think to give other perspective regarding this democratic and political debate. So that's really the point. And I agree, we have to take care of all the conditions of equality in this debate. Languages issue, information issues, also to prepare and to give a good information. So good information need also to work about this information. It's we can't improvise. We really need to go really deeply in all this explanation, because it's a complex thing. And I know that the moment is not dedicated to, or we don't, it's really difficult when we are talking about complexity, but it's really what we have to face together.
Yes, thank you very much. Also, Pascal, yes, to underline all these elements regarding also the conditions and how also as Relais we can support also a safe space to help and to underline also the European cooperation and also in solidarity with the artists and the cultural organizations, the creators and the cultural organization in Ukraine. And so now if I'm coming back in French to our speakers, and it's important en tant que relais, effectivement, d'être aussi un espace d'appui et pour justement aussi aider à cette dimension de créer aussi un espace qui soit sûr pour aussi développer une coopération avec les artistes, les organisations culturelles ukrainiennes. Et donc c'est aussi voilà une dimension qu'on va continuer d'approfondir, de travailler ensemble en fait pour ces prochaines semaines, ces prochains mois. Et donc également pour continuer à suivre en fait cette actualité, on aura l'occasion donc de se retrouver très prochainement à nouveau, et nous vous invitons également à suivre également la revue de presse que nous publions sur notre site internet également chaque semaine pour être au plus près de cette actualité. Et donc voilà, nous aurons bientôt là la conclusion de notre émission. Et donc voilà, on aura l'occasion de se retrouver très prochainement à nouveau pour une prochaine émission donc de notre série de Mapping the Next Steps, que vous pourrez également retrouver, et cette émission sera également disponible en replay sur les réseaux sociaux et sur notre page YouTube. Et nous invitons également à vous inscrire à notre newsletter afin de suivre cette actualité européenne. Et donc on souhaitait, voilà, en conclusion, évidemment, remercier l'ensemble de nos invités qui ont travaillé, qui ont contribué à la réalisation de cette émission. Et donc particulièrement au sein de l'équipe de relais, nos collègues Florence Diez, Mathilde Vasseur, Martha Gutiérrez et Ben. Et également ici avec nous au studio, Boran Tobelem, journaliste de toute l'Europe, et notre collègue Laurence, et notre collègue également Joaquina qui nous a aidé à préparer cette émission. Et donc pour le rappeler, donc voilà, le Relais Culture Europe est soutenu par la Commission européenne, le ministère de la Culture, le Centre national du cinéma et les régions. Et donc merci encore une fois à nos invités de notre session donc de ce matin. Et donc nous nous retrouvons donc très bientôt pour nos prochaines émissions. Merci à vous et à très vite.
Au revoir.